to the Liberty Podcast with Clint Armitage. We are proclaiming liberty one show at a time, and the next one starts right now. All right. How's it going, everybody? Clint Armitage, the Proclaim Liberty Podcast. Okay, so like I had said before in the last episode, God pivoted because we were supposed to be doing Matthew 6. We're supposed to be powering through Matthew chapter 6, but he revealed to me some cool stuff that I had revealed on the last podcast, which he gave me a few weeks ago. And so while I was actually doing that last podcast, which started the pattern of two, he gave me more information that he wanted me to get out there, still regarding the pattern of two, but kind of in a different way, or at least different passages to support that pattern of two, and how he still has that same type of theme going here, because when two, of the same, it kind of expresses God's will in terms of establishing or revealing, and that's what we had talked about last time. Well, today is no different. We have more of that, except this time it's going to be shown from different passages and having a different reason. And the reason using the two this time is going to be revolving around discipline, or not only discipline, but also it's still along the same lines of revealing and establishing, but we're going to see it kind of in a different light here. And it starts actually way back in Deuteronomy 17. Okay, so let's start with Deuteronomy 17, verse 6. Here we go. On the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses, a man shall be put to death. But no one shall be put to death on the testimony of only one witness. The hands of the witnesses must be the first in putting him to death, and then the hands of the people. You must purge the evil from among you. Okay, so what's interesting is you notice that when it comes to punishment for crimes, right, and accusing people of crimes and kind of doling out the punishment there, God is requiring 2 or more, 3 witnesses to kind of establish that. And he says, you don't take the testimony when it's something about someone being put to death on someone's testimony. It can't just be one testimony. It has to be 2 or 3, which it kind of establishes a little bit more credibility to the crime, right? And also it provides fairness for the person being accused, more fairness, right? Because it's harder to get 2 to 3 people to corroborate a story than it is to get one person. All right. And then the other thing that happens is when you have the 2, you're talking about, again, more of God trying to establish things and reveal things, like in this case, revealing a crime and establishing his punishment for that. And so he talks about not only having the 2 or 3 witnesses for accusing this person for a crime to be put to death, but he also says that the hands of the witnesses must be the first in putting him to death, then the hands of all the other people. That's obviously a good thing in terms of accountability, because if you're these witnesses, not only are you doing the accusation, now you actually have to be the first to put this person to death by stoning. So there's some accountability there, because it's not just you saying, okay, yeah, this guy did it, and then, the government go and, take this guy and put him to death. It's actually your hand that has to do it too. So more accountability to making sure this is the correct thing that is happening. So again, God uses 2, the pattern of 2 of the same, right? So the same story has to be happening here, the same accusation and the same information on the crime to establish it as a crime punishable by death. But the goal is the same for these 2 witnesses, 2 or 3 in this case here. Okay. And we have heard stuff like, and in the New Testament, you've heard, hey, if 2 or 3 witnesses are there gathered in my name, I am there, kind of thing. And that's, part of like Matthew 18:6. Actually, let's see if I can get to that. Matthew 18:16. Here it goes. But if he will not hear thee, then take with thee 1 or 2 more, that in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every word may be established. So there it is, 2 or 3 more. Again, things are being established, things are being revealed, and it has to be 2 of the same. You have to have the same initiation of the same goal happening here with these 2 or 3 witnesses. God is establishing things, and you notice it's more along the lines of not only criminality, but discipline. Church discipline here, in that case there in Matthew 18:16, we've got someone who's not listening to you in the church, right? You're trying to tell them that they've trespassed here, and you go to tell him their issue, and you tell him alone. And if he hears you and understands you and changes his ways, great. But if he doesn't hear you, then you're instructed in the church to take 1 or 2 more with you in order to establish this accusation against him. And again, if he doesn't listen, then the Bible tells us to treat him as you would a pagan or a tax collector. In verse 18, it says, I tell you the truth, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. And here's the other part here where it talks about using, again, it's the witnesses of 2 here. Verse 19, again, I tell you that if 2 of you on earth agree about anything you ask for, it will be done for you by my Father in heaven. For where 2 or 3 come together in my name, there I am with them. And it's interesting, okay, the context revolving around that, because normally when we hear that, right, when 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, then I am there in their midst, there I am with them. It's usually used for only, hey, pray for anything you want, which it does talk about right there. But if you look at the context of that whole section, you're actually talking about gathering 2 or 3 in your name in regards to church discipline. That's what that whole section was talking about, was church discipline. But when we hear that verse, we usually attribute it to just praying for whatever you want, and not necessarily whatever you want, but whatever you are praying for, and you do it with 2 or 3, then I am there, right? You don't normally hear that it's associated with church discipline, because that's the whole section there in those passages, talking to someone that has done something wrong, and you're trying to correct them within the church. So but it does say if 2 of you on earth agree about anything you ask for, it will be done for you in the Father in heaven. So just again, a little side note that the context is with church discipline on that. So going back to the pattern of 2, it's you having 2 of the same goal, 2 of the same agreement here. Things are going to be revealed or established or done for you by, Jesus says, my Father in heaven. All right, so let's look at the other thing I'm going to bring up around revolving around the pattern of 2, and we're still talking about now 2 witnesses. Okay, so the last episode we didn't talk about 2 witnesses, 2 or 3 witnesses. This episode we're talking about witnesses, about church discipline and criminality and accusations. And now we're going to go all the way to Revelation verse 11 and talk about the 2 witnesses. Okay, it's pretty cool here. So let's turn to Revelation 11 and look at that. Okay, so in Revelation 11, God sends 2 witnesses. Let me start by reading. Well, it's actually a few verses here. So I'm going to stop a little bit, talk about some things, and then read some more. Okay, verse 1 from chapter 11. And this is John speaking here. I was given a reed like a measuring rod and was told, go and measure the temple of God and the altar and count the worshipers there, but exclude the outer court. Do not measure it, because it has been given to the Gentiles. They will trample on the holy city for 42 months, and I will give power to my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. Normally, when you're clothed in sackcloth, back in biblical times, it was a mourning thing done when things were not good. It wasn't a celebration time when you're clothed in sackcloth and putting ashes on your head and all that stuff. Let me read verse 4 here. These are the 2 olive trees and the 2 lampstands that stand before the Lord of the earth. If anyone tries to harm them, fire comes from their mouths and devours their enemies. This is how anyone who wants to harm them must die. These men have power to shut up the sky so that it will not rain during the time they are prophesying, and they have power to turn waters into blood and to strike the earth with every kind of plague as often as they want. So that's the end there in verse 6. Now, the Bible doesn't say, Revelation doesn't say who these witnesses actually are, okay? But there is some speculation on who they are based on some of the things that they're going to be doing here, which we just talked about. We talked about water into blood, right? And then striking the earth with every kind of plague as often as they want. So one of the people they believe, or the identity of the witnesses, is going to be Moses. Moses and Elijah, and we'll talk about that. First, Moses, because you see those miracles, waters into blood. Well, Moses did that when the Egyptians were not allowing them to leave to go worship God out in the desert. And so that was done by Moses. So that's why they believe that Moses is one of these 2 witnesses. And then they believe Elisha as well is another one of these witnesses. They think it's Elisha because of, it talks about destroying their enemies with fire, which Elijah did as well. Elijah did, okay? When he was on the earth here, that's what he did too. He did that back in 2 Kings when the fire came down and killed the people there. The people that were trying to get him to go to the king, Ahab, right? He was part of that. So anyways, that is why people believe that it's Moses and Elisha, because it corresponds with the miracles that they did while they were here. Also kind of giving credence to this view is the fact that Moses and Elijah both appeared with Jesus at the Transfiguration in Matthew 17. And Jewish tradition also talks about expecting Moses and Elijah to return based on the prophecy in Malachi chapter 4. So it's pretty strong to believe that these 2 witnesses are going to be Moses and Elijah. And they are here, again, the pattern of 2 of the same. They're coming with the same goal, and they're prophesying. And again, they're in sackcloth, so it's not something positive here that they're here for. They're prophesying against the people that are defying God here. They're prophesying against the beast and the dragon and all that stuff. And it says in verse 7 here, now when they have finished their testimony, the beast that comes up from the abyss will attack them and overpower and kill them. Their bodies will lie in the street of the great city, which is figuratively called Sodom and Egypt, where also their Lord is crucified. For 3.5 days, men from every people, tribe, language, and nation will gaze upon their bodies and refuse them burial. The inhabitants of the earth will gloat over them and will celebrate by sending each other gifts because these 2 prophets had tormented those who live on the earth. Okay, let's look at that right now, because this is another, this part really blows my mind. It's so cool in terms of what God is revealing here. So they're doing their testimony, right? They're prophesying. They're basically, telling people that they're fighting against God, and that's why they're in sackcloth and all that. But then the beast comes up, attacks them, overpowers, and kills them. Okay, now this is the interesting part. Their bodies will lie in the street of the great city called, Sodom and Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified. Well, their Lord was crucified outside of Jerusalem there. That's the area it's talking about, but it's figuratively called Sodom and Egypt. For 3.5 days, men from every people, tribe, language, and nation will gaze upon their bodies and refuse them burial. Okay, think years back. Years back, it was not possible for the inhabitants of the earth, okay, for 3.5 days, from every people, tribe, language, and nation to be able to gaze on their bodies and refuse them burial. It wasn't that long ago that you could not could not see things in another land, right? There's no way to do it. Now, I mean, it's all over the place. With the internet, you can see anything with the camera. You can put anything on the internet live. Anywhere in the world now, you can see things from anywhere. And so this could not have been done just a few years ago, right? Before the internet, you could not do this kind of thing. You could do it with, television crews and all that stuff. So that was possible. But even before that, I mean, look at this was written in the first century here. This is John, the disciple. So if he wrote this, there was no way that anyone at that time could understand how men from every people, tribe, language, and nation could gaze upon their bodies. There's no possible way. But when technology changed over the years, right, 2,000 years later, we have the ability to view something live. And they said it's going to be viewed for 3.5 days. 3.5 days. Okay, they're going to refuse them burial because they hated what they were saying. The people hated what they were saying, right, because they're against God. And the inhabitants of the earth are going to gloat. And they're going to celebrate by sending each other gifts because these two witnesses have died. Because the beast comes up and kills them. Because they basically tormented them with their prophecies. And they didn't like that. So they're gloating and celebrating the fact that these two witnesses were killed. I mean, how evil is that, right? Now we're starting to celebrate that people are dying and getting killed. And enjoying it to the point where they're sending gifts to other people. Amazing. Just unbelievable that that's what it comes to. Okay, and then it says in verse 11, but after the 3.5 days, a breath of life comes from God, enters them, and they stood on their feet, and terror struck those among them. Then they heard a loud voice from heaven saying to them, come up here. And they went up to heaven in a cloud, while their enemies looked on. Again, there's another Elijah thing. Well, he went up without dying, and the Lord just took him up. And so there's another thing that kind of confirms, but it kind of leads you to believe that Elijah is involved in this here as one of the witnesses. But going back to the point here, two witnesses, and in this case, discipline and prophecy, but the same goal, the pattern of two, is still here. 1 + 1. Right? The same. And their goal is the same, is to prophesy against the people that are fighting against God. And then God's plan is being established and revealed. And this happens to be, if you read on at the end, at verse 14, it says, the second woe has passed. The third woe is coming soon. So it's a woe. It's something not good. It's God's way of telling you he's witnessing against the people here in this time, in this era, because they are against God. And this is not a good time for people, because God's wrath is coming. That's the woe, right? So that was the second woe. Anyways, we have continued confirmation that when a pattern of two is created, two of the same, 1 and 1, whether it be a goal, right, in substance or in meaning, God's plan is established, God's plan is revealed. And this is just another way that this happens in terms of witnesses. And it started all the way back in Deuteronomy when the Lord was setting his law down in terms of criminality. And then later on we see it in the New Testament in terms of accusation of discipline for the church. And now in Revelation, it's discipline for the people that are fighting against God in the last days. So more pattern of two. So there you go. All right. Thanks again for listening. My name is Clint Armitage. This is the Liberty Podcast, and I want you to stay safe, stay motivated, and keep seeking liberty. Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Liberty Podcast with Clint Armitage. If you want to get in touch, email us at info@clintarmitage.com.